Hello, my name is Nicole Griffiths, and I'm with the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project. Today's date is Tuesday, November 6th, 2012, and I'm interviewing Petty Officer 3rd Class Alejandro Tamez, also known as Hondo, at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, about his life and military service. So Hondo, I'd first like to begin by asking you about your early childhood and your family life growing up.
I am the middle child of three. I have an older brother and a younger brother. My parents divorced at 15, when I was 15. Went to high school outside of Austin, Texas. I worked almost full-time from two different jobs. Went to school. I was an athletic trainer, varsity soccer player, Boy Scout for 13 years almost. Got married right out of high school. What else would you like to know?
What year were you born?
1985.
And your parents, what did they do?
My father is a construction worker, foreman, and my mother was a lead bus driver for the school district and trainer of new drivers.
You said that growing up you were an athletic trainer in school. Did you participate in other activities?
I was Air Force ROTC, Boy Scouts, different sports. Like I played varsity soccer, but then for athletic training I did the sports medicine for football and baseball.
What made you want to join the Air Force ROTC?
The first year that we had it was my sophomore year in high school, and I'd always wanted to be in the military, and so I thought that would be a pretty fun thing to do in high school, is have classes and get to pretend like you're in the military.
Why do you say that you always wanted to be in the military? Is there a specific reason?
No, not that I'm aware of. No one in my family was ever military. I know my grandfather was military, but he was just because the 4-year mandatory, like for the Korean War, that he had to do. But other than that, no one was. But I just always felt like I was drawn to it. I don't know why, but I always wanted to.
And you said you participated in Air Force ROTC.
Mm-hmm.
Was that because that was what was offered at your school?
Yes, it was the first one offered, and so I joined it. And when I was going into the military, I thought about Air Force first, but we spoke with the Navy after that and went that route.
You mentioned that you got married right out of high school. Can you tell me about that?
Yep, I met my wife and we dated I met her at the beginning of my senior year, and so we dated for that year, and we just decided after dating for almost a year to get married. We got married in December after I graduated in 2003.
What's your wife's name?
Christy.
And I'd like to transition and talk about your enlistment in the Navy. Can you tell me your first inclinations toward joining the military?
Since I'd always wanted to go, I first went to the Air Force recruiter to talk to them. Since I was Air Force ROTC, I did know the recruiter. But at the time, I weighed about 250 pounds. And I knew that there was a minimum or a maximum that you had to be. And so I knew what I needed to do. I needed to lose weight to go. But I wanted to find out from my ASVAB, my test scores to get in, what I qualified for, what jobs I could get. And I scored an 84, and at that time I didn't know if that was good or bad because I hadn't talked to any recruiters. And I spoke to the Air Force recruiter, and he's like, oh, you can have whatever job you want pretty much as long as you qualify for. It's just I can't tell you about the jobs because you're overweight. And so like the Air Force standpoint was, if they're going to talk to me or talk to me about the jobs, I had to be able to sign up that day if I wanted to. And since I couldn't, he wouldn't talk to me about them. And so we were, my wife and I were talking to the recruiter, and we decided that afterwards that maybe we should look at the other branches just to see what we could do. And I didn't want to do Marines or Army just because, in 2003, 2004, we just got into the Iraq War. 9/11 was fresh in everybody's mind. And so, we knew that if I went Marine or Army, I'd be going straight to Iraq and Afghanistan. So went to talk to the Navy recruiter, and he's like, yeah, you qualify for whatever job you want, just, pick your job. And so I had him talk to me about them, and he was telling me about the jobs, but then he's like, also, we have to work on your weight, so I'll work out with you, a couple times a week to help you get into shape and everything. And so he started doing that, and then after, a month of him doing that, he had to do his own things. And so, but by then I was in a routine, and so I would continue losing weight to go. And at that point, I thought about talking to the Air Force recruiter again, just to see, because I didn't sign any paperwork with the Navy saying I would go Navy. But at that point, I did feel kind of obligated to the Navy, just because he had worked so hard to get me in, and so I went to the Navy.
You mentioned that one of the reasons why you did not enlist with the Army is because you knew that there would be a high likelihood of you being deployed.
Mm-hmm.
You were 16 or 17 when September 11th happened.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me what your thoughts and feelings were at that time?
I know when we watched it happen in class, we were all confused at that time of what was going on. And so, like, when it came out, the week after and the weeks after that, that it was a terrorist attack, all me and my buddies, because we came from a pretty country school, it was, of course, hey, we need to get up in arms and go after them kind of thing. And so I had initially wanted to be a Marine. I even talked with Marine recruiters, but that was before I got married, and so priorities kind of changed on that point. If I was single, I would definitely have been a Marine.
Before, you mentioned that while you were in high school, some friends did end up joining the military,
Mm-hmm.
and you knew someone who had been killed in action.
Yep,
How did that impact you?
I know it was when I was deploying, or not deploying, but when I went to boot camp and afterwards, just because there was not a year, but 7-8 months after I had graduated high school that I went. And so we decided, or my friends that went, they were already being deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and it wasn't, I think, two months into one of my friend's deployments, he was killed. And so, of course, that weighed really heavily on, just because, one, he was my friend, but knowing that even though I am Navy, I might be deployed over there, or I might be deployed somewhere and something else could happen to me. And so, of course, that weighed pretty heavily. And it was hard for a while to think, oh, am I doing the right thing? But I was already in at that point. And so we just hoped that I was doing the right thing, and when I'd stay safe. So.
You mentioned your wife being supportive throughout this entire process. How did the rest of your family feel when you told them you were enlisting?
I know my mom had, issues with it, just because I was leaving. I wouldn't be home anymore, and so that kind of threw her. My dad, I don't think he ever said how he felt about it or anything, and I was already out of the house at that point, and so I had made up my mind. And my brothers, I graduated high school before my older brother, and so he was actually still in high school when I enlisted and everything. And he was always into trouble with the law and everything, and so, of course, to him, I was, I was going to be a cop or something and come after him, and I'm like, well, that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing it, so I can support my family, kind of thing. And, really, when there's not a lot of money going around and there's not insurance that's, cost effective or anything, the best way to get, money and insurance is to join the military. And that's why I did it. And once I told, like, my friends why, because I think I was the only one married, I think, at that time that I knew of it out of my class of 500 students. And so, that was the best way to support us. And I think most people understood. They understood that more than they understood me getting married right out of high school.
How did having a wife impact your overall military experience, particularly enlisting in the Navy?
Enlisting in the Navy, it impacted greatly, just because we chose that branch, and because I had, a wife and a child at that time. But when it came further on down the line, like 2-3 years into my Navy career, her support was always there for me, but her support wasn't always there for the Navy. just because of my long deployments or my long time away from home had been really tough on the family.
And how many children do you have?
3.
Can you tell me their names and how old they are?
My eldest name is Hans. He is 15. My middle one is Maxwell. He is 7. And my youngest is my daughter, Emily. And 7.
So you, when you enlisted, already had one child initially.
Yes.
How did that impact joining the military?
That was another reason why we went Navy, just to make sure that, as his father, that I would be there for the most part. And, he wouldn't have that high of a chance of me dying overseas or something. And, with Air Force and Navy, they were pretty much the safest of the branches.
Let's transition and talk a little bit about boot camp now. You did your boot camp at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center off the shores of Lake Michigan, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And when was that?
That was from August to October of 2004.
How long did that last?
8 weeks, I believe.
I was reading in Time magazine an article from 2001, and they talked about giving out stress cards at these camps in case the situation got too rough for recruits. Did that happen when you were there?
I had heard about that, and I got a lot of crap for it, when I was joining or whatever. My brother and his friends would be like, "Oh, you're gonna get a stress card, and you waive it whenever you want." So it's not a real branch, but they didn't have them when I was there, and so I didn't feel overly stressed in boot camp. I think I was pretty prepared for it, but I know we had a few people that had issues with it. Nothing major, but I didn't feel like the physical of it or anything was very difficult whatsoever.
What was your biggest fear going into boot camp?
I think just the unknown, just because I knew, I looked up and I watched videos, what was to be expected, but it doesn't give the full picture, and it was easier than I expected it to be. Even the mental aspect of it, I could see if it was as hard as Army boot camp or Marine boot camp, where it's drilling nonstop all night kind of thing, and Navy, I guess I kind of lucked out, and you woke up at 7 in the morning, but it was to them yelling and everything like you would expect, but you had to be in bed before 9, 10 o'clock at night, and so you had a pretty set routine and it didn't change much from it.
You make a lot of comparisons between the various branches of the military, and I'm curious how you handled people saying things like the Navy isn't as tough as the Army.
I know, when my wife first mentioned for us to talk to the Navy recruiter, all I had of the Navy, my aspect or my view of it was, and it's from what everybody else would always say, the Navy is just full of queers, and it's not true whatsoever. But and so that was my view of it when I went to talk to the recruiter. It was like, I'm just going to be with a bunch of sissies or whatever. But when it comes to the physical aspect of it and everything, I think most people understand that there is a big difference in the branches, and my job didn't entail for me to get shot at or climb an obstacle course, but I think it would have made a more fun boot camp. So,
what was the biggest adjustment from transitioning from a citizen into somebody in the military?
The biggest adjustment is pretty much letting it go of your family ties and everything just while you're in boot camp. For the one, you're used to a lot of freedom and movement, you can do, go where you want, do what you want kind of thing. And boot camp, everything, you're told what to do, where to go, how to stand, how to dress. And so with it being that way, that was one of the hardest adjustments. But I think with my ROTC training, I already had half of that down. I just didn't have the Navy part of it down. And so it made it more tolerable, I think.
Can you walk me through your first day of boot camp?
Sure. I think I left MEPS, which is I forget what it stands for, but it's your processing center. And I did mine in San Antonio, Texas. Took a bus to the airport, hopped on the flight from here to Chicago. It was a straight shot. And so when we got to Chicago, I think it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we had to go to the USO that's inside the airport and wait for the bus from boot camp to pick us up. Well, the bus didn't come till about 9. That way to make sure all of the flights that are bringing recruits in, that comes at the end of that, because they have all the information. And so the bus came, loaded it up, and it was a pretty quiet bus ride. You didn't know what was going to be. There was a second-class petty officer on board who is a drill instructor, and so we expected him to be yelling at us, but at that point it wasn't. We watched a video going over pretty much what the start of boot camp was going to be, just to get ready. You didn't see any yelling or anything, but we pulled to the recruit and processing center there on Great Lakes, and then the doors open, and at that point all the drill instructors come on, yell at you, get you off the bus, get you in a line, and once you're in a line, they take you back through the processing just like you just did hours before. It's height and weight checks, even though they just checked you. It's a drug screening again, even though you were just done. And then at that point, they march you through a line pretty much, and a conveyor belt, and you just hold open your C bag, and you have a card already that has like your sizes and everything, and they just throw it on your bag, and you buckle it up, and then you go to another processing area where they start doing one by one information collecting. And so at that point they allow you to do a 5-minute phone call to your loved one to let them know that you were there and safe, and to maybe hear from you in a week or a couple weeks, 3, 4, it depends on how lucky you are, I think. And that lasted till about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and at that point you marched over to your new home, your barracks, where it's going to be. And we were able to go to sleep until about 6 o'clock, where they woke us up yelling, and our day began for the first one.
Who did you call when you were allowed to make that phone call?
My wife.
And what did you talk about?
It was pretty much, they didn't give you a lot of time, so it was I'm here. And she could hear the yelling in the background, so I think that kind of freaked her out, but she didn't say. And then that, I would write as often as I could, and then I'd call whenever I was allowed to. And we didn't have email whatsoever in boot camp.
How did missing your family impact your morale while at boot camp?
It always weighed on my mind, since I did have a wife and kid. But I think for me it was just an added push to make sure that I completed my boot camp, and to where I graduated, if not at the top of my class kind of thing, but to where, one, I stay under the radar just by not getting in trouble, but making sure that it was worth it for me to do what I did. And I did graduate, top of my class. You have 3 tests other than physical, but like written exams and everything. And the first one I missed 1 question, and the other 2 I got perfect scores. And so I had pretty much my pick of whatever came out after boot camp.
Can you describe your recruit division commander?
Yep. We had 2, or I had 3. The actual lead one was a chief that we saw every once in a while, unless we screwed up pretty big, and then he came in to yell at us. Then our other 2 that we dealt with daily was a second class and a first class. The first class was a bigger guy, to where now he'd probably be processed out for being overweight, but I think at that time they didn't have the rules for that. And he was what we considered a hard ass. He was the one yelling at us most of the time. When it came to, the biggest thing that they were teaching us was attention to detail. It's like when it came to folding our shirt, our white undershirts and our underwear, it had to be, it's folded a certain way, and then you have to stack it a certain way. It's like you have your t-shirt folded, and then you have your white underwear folded on top of it, and it's a layer just like that. It's t-shirt, underwear, underwear. And you had to have it all line up and straight. And so he would make us, on Saturday mornings, sit there and fold our laundry, make a nice stack for him, bring it over to him, and he'll look at it. And if he didn't like it, he would sit in an office chair. If he didn't like it, he would punt it across the room and into a big pile with everybody else's. And so you had to get it again, do it all over again until you got it right. And then our other one, who was a second class, he didn't talk much, but when he did yell or do something, you knew it. But he was with the Blue Angels before he came to us. He was a mechanic for them, and so he was, clean cut. Everything was, pristine on him, just because the Blue Angels expected a lot, and so did Recruit Division. And so he was, to me, I idled him just because how perfect I thought he was, and so I looked at him as like a mentor. And then when it came towards the end of boot camp, when you got to know them as a person and as a sailor, and not just our Recruit Division commander, I had a lot to learn from him, so I liked it.
Your first RDC, the one that didn't really show up unless something big happened, what would have to happen for him to show up and yell at you?
Like if there was a couple people that decided they would talk and make a scene kind of thing, like when we were in line or something for chow to eat, and it was brought up to his attention by like a couple other RDCs, and so of course in that point he came to our division and made us exercise for like an hour.
Did you personally ever have to do extra PT because of something that you did?
I did. We had a day, like I had an extra duty to where outside of my division where I would go with the ship staff, and our ship is like the whole barracks, and so we had other training divisions in there, and they had people that worked for the ship staff. Like for me, I was the ship staff yeoman, and if somebody was getting either kicked out of boot camp or sent back to a later division, that one's like, say if we're 4 weeks in, they were sent and they messed up quite big, and instead of kicking them out, they can send them back to like a week 1 division, and so that way he has to do the whole 4 weeks again. Like I would do the paperwork for it and everything, and then once in a while you had to stand watch on the ship's quarterdeck, and for that was addressing people coming in and out, check-ins, check-outs type thing. And it was a day I had a night watch. I think it started like at 8, and we had just gotten beat as a division, and that's with physical exercise, because we weren't doing something right as a division. And so like all of my stuff, like my whole uniform, I'm still just drenched, but I had to be there. And so I showed up on the quarterdeck with my stuff just drenched. I'm drenched wet and of sweat, and the petty officer that was there sent me back to my division and said, hey, I need to change or whatever. And but it was laundry day too, and so like we hadn't got our stuff back, and so the stuff that I had was just as nasty, I think, and so I showed back up with that one, but it was dry, but it was wrinkly and everything. And he's like, oh, I sent you back, and so you show back up with a crappy uniform still. And so he, there on the quarterdeck, he called somebody else to take my watch, and then he proceeded to exercise me for 2 hours. And it was at the point to where he was, I guess I upset him enough, because he was asking questions and I was answering the questions, but apparently I wasn't supposed to. They were rhetorical, and so that was making him mad. And so then he told me that the only way I was going to leave the quarterdeck was from the MPs, the police coming to get me for failure to train, or in the ambulance. Well, 10 o'clock, I think, came around, and it's lights out, and they're not allowed to do exercise after that. And so he just sent me back to my quarterdeck, or to my division. And at that time, the second class petty officer, my RDC, was walking out, because they leave at night, and we have nobody in there. And he just looks at me, and I'm drenched again in sweat, and just kind of smiles and tells me to go to bed. And so like, I didn't get beat again, which like I was expecting to, but he just shook his head and kept on going.
During this time, how important was it to form bonds with the people you were with?
I think maybe spoke to, on the most part, maybe 2 or 3 people in my group of, I think, 70 or 60 or so. I don't know how many people were in there, but I really was trying. Like to me, I was there to do my job, and to me, my job was to graduate boot camp. And so I really didn't feel like I was there to make friends or enemies. I was just there to go home at the end of it. And so like I'd wind up talking to like the guy I shared the bed with. He was on top and I was on bottom, and maybe one or two others around him. But most of the time it was, you had cliques just like you would in high school. Like if you had people from a certain area where would all be friends just because they had commonalities or whatever. And one of the people that I really talked to, he was going subs too, and so we talked to him, or I talked to him, and then we went to Connecticut together for school, and so I continued my friendship with him, and then I went to Georgia, he stayed up there, and so like 2-3 years later when he came to Georgia, and I ran into him again, so it was good to see, like at that point, an old friend kind of thing.
Can you talk about your feelings upon graduating boot camp?
Yeah, I was pretty happy just because, I'd set a goal and I achieved it. And not only like to me and not only did I graduate boot camp, but I graduated, top of the class kind of thing. And so I exceeded what I was expecting. And so I was happy. My wife was happy. The next thing for us was what happened next. And so that was a kind of a shock just because we didn't know what to expect. She was going back home to Texas, and I was going to Connecticut for school, and so that was, what was really weighing on our mind the most after graduating.
Is Connecticut where you did your specialized training?
That's where I started my sub school. I think it's a 6-week program to go on to subs, just giving a generalized training for the submarine, how to react, what's going to happen, fire drills, flooding drills. Submarine escape training, where you're in like a tube that we actually have them on the subs. It's the escape trunk, and if the sub is flooding and you're above a certain depth, you're able to get inside this escape trunk, and it will pressurize, and you're in like a little pressurized suit, not a scuba suit, but it's just like a pressurized waterproof suit. And once the pressure equalizes, the hatch will open and you can escape to the surface. And that's really when they find out if you're claustrophobic or not, because you're sitting in a tube with 4 people. You're all in the suit, so you take up a lot of room. And the escape trunk is maybe 5 feet in diameter, but and in all directions. And so you can imagine it's a pretty small area, and then it starts flooding with water. And in the real thing, it would flood all the way to above your head, but in the training, it floods to like neckline, and so you have to be able to breathe and not freak out. Well, I know in my trunk alone during the training, we had a guy freak out, and it would take all of us, to get him to calm him down and get him out of the trunk so he didn't hurt us and continue on. And so at that point, if they recognize that you are claustrophobic or like he freaked out. And since we were all new, if you've been in for under 6 months, you can get processed out of the Navy, just like you never went in kind of thing. It's not honorable. It just gets wiped clean kind of thing. And I think he chose to do that, or they can send you to the surface fleet on like a regular boat. But I think he chose to get out.
Did you experience any claustrophobia during that time?
No, I did not.
And at this time, did you choose your military occupational specialty?
I did, and they give you, when I went into boot camp, or to MEPS to go to boot camp, that's when you pick your job, and most of the time then what you're doing. But for submarines, they have what was called a submarine electronic computer field, and that's what I chose, and I didn't know it at that time, but it's 4 different jobs make up that 4 fields. And so it's a fire control technician, which fires the missiles from our submarines, electronics for navigation, radio operator, and sonar technician. And so they want you to rate 1 through 4, your highest to lowest one. And I think I put fire control as first. sonar as second, navigation as third, and radio operator I put as fourth, and I actually wrote beside it, "I do not want this job." And of course, that's the one I got. I think it was out of spite. And but like after going through training and being on subs, I was glad I had that job and not the other ones.
Can you explain what a Trident operator does?
Yep. For me, my job was to establish and maintain radio communications with other submarines, our fleet, or the president if need be. That was my main job, and then my secondary job was to maintain ships' internet, to maintain email list, access list. So pretty much I was a computer technician on board the submarine.
And why didn't you want this job?
At that time, it seemed boring to me. Like when like fire control tech, what you knew about it in school was you get to push the button that launches the nuclear missile, and something like that. To anybody who's like me, how does that not sound cool? And then sonar, it just seemed pretty neat because you can put on the headphones and hear all the noise in the water. You hear whales, you hear the dolphins, you can hear other boats. Navigation, I didn't know anything about it other than I didn't know if I would be driving the boat or what. But to me, it just felt like the radio operator would just be boring, but it turned out to not be.
I want to talk about your deployments now,
Mm-hmm.
and your first deployment was from 2005 and 2006.
Mm-hmm.
What were your feelings upon first hearing that you would be deployed?
When I met my boat and everything, when I was finishing school in Georgia, they had just gotten back from deployment, and so I was expecting to be home for a little while. Well, they sent out my crew that I got attached to. I showed up in middle of October of 2005, and we deployed first week of November of 2005, and we didn't come back until January. And so, I was home, or I just got to the boat, and then 2 weeks later I'm deploying, and so that was kind of tough, especially because I had my 7-year-old now was just born in September of 2005, and so he was less than a month old, a little over a month old when I deployed, and so to have a newborn, I didn't know what to expect when I got back or anything, and so it was a pretty tough time, just especially because my anniversary is in December, Christmas is in December, and so to me, I felt like I was missing a lot, and so it was a hard deployment to do.
How did your wife take the news?
She was okay with it because it was our first deployment. I mean, she wasn't happy that it was going to be over Christmas or anything, but we knew what was expected of me, and so she wasn't happy, but she was indifferent, I think, at that point.
How did you explain your deployment to your oldest son?
That was pretty tough, especially because they got to finally live with me after me being gone from October or August of 2004. They moved in back with me when we got to Georgia, and so I think that was May of 2005. And so I just spent almost a year apart from them, and then I had to tell them that I was leaving for another 3 months. And so he took it kind of rough just because he just got his dad back to him, and they were just taking him away. And so I know he still has issues with the Navy, and so and he's not shy to say it, so we'll have to hear about it still.
What did you say to him? Did you tell him where you were going?
Yeah, I tried to explain it as much as I could. He was in 3rd grade, and so I was trying to explain it to him. This is what I'm going to be doing. This is what I'd show him on a map, or I'd show him what I'm going to be doing and how I was going to do. And before deployment came, I got to take them on the sub and show them like where I'm going to be working, where I'm going to live, kind of thing. And so I think it made it easier for him.
And this was the USS Maryland.
Yes.
And how long were you on?
On that boat? I was on that boat from October of 2005 until, technically, till like June of 2006. but I did a deployment on a second sub while I was still attached to the Maryland.
And the mission of the Maryland is to provide America with an undetectable nuclear launch platform.
Yep.
And so how did your MOS fit into that overall mission?
As for my job is paramount. You know, when it just is like the person firing the button, without my job on board, we would not get the message to fire. Or if we got the message to fire, we would not be able to corroborate, you know, is this a test fire? Is this a real fire? You know, is this something that we have to do? And we have to authenticate that. And that was my main mission is, one, that's what the establishing and maintaining communications is because we get the message via an alert radio. Like we send a buoy out the back of our sub and let it trail behind us as we're pulling, and we maintain that broadcast, and we'll get a radio message saying that's encoded, and then once we get that message that's encoded, we have to break that message like by code book and everything. And then with the code book, it will give us in that message that we just broke if it's real or if it's a test. And at that point, then we have to get into position, fire our missile. And so without my job, we wouldn't get the message. And so like if Russia fired on us, since that was what our boats were created for, was for the Cold War. And so Russia, that was what our main enemy at that time. And so if they fired on us, and if we didn't have the communication to fire back, you know, we just let, you know, our nation get destroyed without firing back.
What was your day-to-day life like on the submarine?
Day-to-day life was pretty boring. You had 4 watch sections each. Everybody stands like a 6-hour watch to make up the 24-hour day. And so you, like say if you have first watch, you're up for your 6-hour watch, and then you had 12 hours off before you had to go back on to duty. So it was 3 sections then. And then so you would do your 6-hour watch. You normally had after watch cleanup, which meant you spent an hour or so cleaning up a certain section of the boat just to make sure it stays clean and ready to function whenever need be. And then you could, if you were qualified, and by qualified means you're submarine warfare qualified, which meant that everybody's required to be, that you could almost do everybody else's job in the boat. If you're qualified, you can watch TV, play video games, go to sleep, whatever you want. But if you're not qualified, you're spending as many waking hours as possible getting your qualification, because it is required, and it is required in under a year. And so, you know, the biggest part of it is done underway, just because you have nothing but time, nowhere to go. And so like for me, I had my 6-hour watch, my 1 hour off, and sometimes I was either working for about 3 to 4 more hours, either on my qualifications or in the radio room, learning my job better and getting my radio qualifications out of the way. And then I would sleep on average 3 hours a day, and then I would do it all over again.
What was the sleeping situation like?
Sleeping situation, one of the reasons why I didn't want to sleep as much is because I slept on a mattress on the floor on the outside of the missile tubes. We had berthing rooms, but they were either full because we had 180 people, or if you're not qualified and they're empty, you have to sleep where I slept instead of in the berthing rooms, because to them it's an incentive for you to get qualified. And then that way we didn't have to hot rack, which is the if you don't have enough bunks, you hop in a bed that someone pretty much was just getting out of. And the smaller boats, the fast boats, they do that just because there's not enough beds.
And what was communication like between your family?
It was very sporadic. I wrote emails daily, but I knew as a radio operator, you know, the schedule of when they go out pretty much. And it all depends on when we can get to periscope depth, put our antenna up where we can actually connect to the satellite to send our emails or to retrieve emails, because our towed array antennas can't take emails. It's just an old system, and so it's just straight communication to us. We can't send it. And so like I know I would normally get an email at least whenever we were able to do it that way. But I could, my wife wouldn't be getting emails as often as we would expect to be. I think on the 3-month deployment, May had gotten 5 of the 90 or so emails that I sent, just because depending on when we stick the antenna up, whatever we have loaded, may not go or may go, and so it's just a luck of the draw kind of thing.
Did you know that going in that would be the situation?
I did not know that until we got underway, and she did happen to get a email, me explaining that, and so she wasn't happy about it, of course, and neither was I, just because on first deployment it was pretty, you never know what's going on back home, and so you have to make sure, in your head, you're like, oh, I didn't get an email, so I want to make sure that they're safe, kind of thing. And so that's one of the toughest things like we have as submariners compared to the surface fleet. Surface fleet, can get emails regularly, and we could not.
What did you eat when you were aboard?
Food was pretty decent. You had your normal breakfast, lunch, and dinners, except for there's a 4th meal every night at midnight. Because of our watch sections being 6 hours, there's what's called mid-rats, and usually that's either a mixture of like leftover type thing from dinner and to form some other thing. It's a lighter. It's not a full meal. It's just a lighter thing. And then Saturdays, lunchtime is our slider day, is what we call it, but it's hamburgers, and so it's really pretty good. Saturday mid-rats is pizza night, and so they home make pizzas, fresh from scratch. And then Sunday dinner is prime rib and lobsters, like the crab legs, I think, yeah. And so I didn't eat either one of those, and so most of the time on Sunday nights I would eat like peanut butter and jelly, just because I didn't, that's my choice thing. But food on sub was 10 times better than food on the surface fleet.
Did you have any mentors who maybe this wasn't their first deployment who helped you adjust to submarine life?
Yep. I made friends really quick just because I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky, outgoing person. I had a first class from another division, one of the navigation guys that I didn't want to be, or that I was glad I wasn't. He kind of took me under his wing and said, hey, this is what to expect. This is how it's going to happen. If I had any questions, I could ask him about it. And it was good that he wasn't in my division for radio, just because he gave me a greater picture of the boat and how it all worked, and not just radio. And so I was lucky to have him.
When you finally surfaced, what was the first thing that you did?
The first thing I did once we pulled back in port, just because my first deployment was 92 days long, and we didn't surface. I didn't see the sun in the 92 days, and so the first thing we did when we got back to port was find our families to go home. If we didn't have duty, if you had duty, you were still stuck on the boat until the next day. But then I found my wife and kids. Got to them, hugged my wife, hugged my oldest son, and then went to hold my newborn at that time, and he pulled away and wouldn't let me, just because I left when he was a month and a half old, and so he didn't know who I was, because I'd been gone for 3 months. So it was a bit heartbreaking, but it was to be expected. And so we went home, and I think first thing on the way from subs, from the submarine, we went to Chick-fil-A just to eat, so it was good to have real food.
What was the air quality like for you?
It was different. There's I don't know if it's a dry chemical that they put in that, because we make our own air on subs, but they put a desiccant drying agent in the air. That way it keeps the moisture out of the electrical equipment and everything. And so you always had to use a saline solution for your nose so it doesn't, get bloody or something, just because how dry it is. But with the desiccant, I don't know if you've ever I don't know, most people I'm sure don't, but the little dry packet that's in shoes and everything, like when you buy new, but that's desiccant inside there, and it has a weird smell. And so like coming back from the boat, you stink. Everybody stinks. And it's like the first thing like my wife and kids said is how awful I smelled. And I'm like, well, I showered. And they're like, well, it's not that. And it's like all of my clothes after deployment had to be stuck like in the garage because they, it doesn't go away. And so it's pretty bad, the smell wise, but the air other than that is, tolerable.
How much time did you have off between your first and second deployment?
I had 2 weeks off from deployments because I was home. We got home from deployment, and you're usually given a 2-week stand-down period. And that stand-down period, you can go, like my family's from Texas, and so like I could have gone to Texas if I wanted, but we decided to stay home. And my ship was entering a dry dock period, and so it was going to be, in port for over 7 months, getting repairs and everything. And so I was excited. I'm going to be working like a 9-to-5 job is what I expected. Well, the day that I got back from 2-week stand down, my chief was like, hey, is your sea bags packed? And I'm like, no, we're going to be home for the next 7 months. He's like, oh, you're not. I'm like, what the hell do you mean, kind of thing, because it caught me off guard. He's like, well, the USS Wyoming is down a radio member, and you're not qualified yet, and so we want to get you qualified, and so we want to send you out with them for the next 3 months. And at that point, I was like, no, it's not going to happen, kind of thing. And I was pretty defiant about it. I'm like, at that point, I left, and I called him and told him that he's going to have to tell my wife and not me. And so he met with us and told my wife that, this has already been, decided, and I am. And that was really hard, on them. And my wife still, I know, and my son, they still have issues from it. And I've been out since '09, and to where certain things or anything will bring it up, and she'll have issues with it still. And so I did another 3-month deployment after being home for 3 weeks or 2 weeks.
So what did you do in those 2 weeks?
Well, at that point, like we pretty much stayed home for the biggest part. We tried to we went to SeaWorld in San Antonio, or not San Antonio, but in Orlando, because I didn't know I was going back out. So we were just staying home and doing things that had I known that I was going back out, I might have went home to Texas or something. But we just did family things.
How did your wife handle raising the children while you were away the second time?
She had a really tough time. My oldest son at that time was undergoing testing for learning disabilities and ADHD and all that. And it turns out he did have a learning disability, and he was having issues shutting down in school from it. And they were we're treating it as like a behavior problem, and when it wasn't. And so like he would get in trouble, and my wife would drop him off, and by the time she was getting back to our house, she was getting a call already from the school saying he was in trouble. And that's when we decided, once they got back, to homeschool him, and because he wasn't getting the help that he needed for his learning disability. And so she had a really tough time, and I didn't know about most of it, because when you get emails or when you send emails, they have to go through someone like me in radio, and they are scanned. Every one of them are scanned by a computer program, searching for keywords, dates. They search for dates to make sure that we're not telling people like when we're going to be in port or where we're going to be. That way we're not vulnerable to attacks. It searches for words like death, any kind of accident like that. So it searches for keywords, and once that it finds, an email with a keyword attached to it, it's sent to someone like me. And I've done it, I've probably read, 1,500 emails from going to the ship or leaving the ship, which I didn't want to do. To me, it's invading privacy, but I can understand it at the same time as if you get bad news and we're underwater, and you start freaking out, you could endanger yourself and the rest of the sub, in order trying to get us back to the surface. And so, if we get an email that says so-and-so's family member died, one that goes to the captain, and the captain has to make the determination if we tell them or if we don't tell them. And one of the cases of that, when I was on the Wyoming, my second deployment, I wound up meeting quite a few people. And one of the guys I had watch with, he was with another division, but I ate, we stood the same watches, and so you eat with the same people. I'm sitting at the table with him daily, every meal, everything. And we got an email saying his ex-wife, who is the mother of his children, was killed in an accident. And I was the one that got the email, and I had to give it to the captain. But we were alert, and so what that alert means, we can't communicate with the outside world for as long as we're alert. And we can't surface, we can't deviate from that, because that's our mission. That means that we're the boat, holding up the flag saying, send me the message. Like, they would send us the message to launch the missile before they send it to any other boat. And so we can't deviate from that schedule. And so we had 2 weeks more of alert time. And so I knew that she was dead. The captain knew. Maybe his chain of command knew. But here I am every meal sitting at the table with him, and I can't tell him. And so that was pretty hard. But just with emails alone, like, they flagged a couple of mine before I could get to them. Of my wife saying how much trouble she was having, but I didn't get to them until I found them in the folder that we stick them in. The chief forgot to remove them from there, so I couldn't see them, and so I read them. And at that point, and now I saw why they did it, because at that point I was upset that I wasn't getting them, or I didn't know this kind of thing, and that I couldn't do anything about it.
How did it impact your morale knowing that you were getting these sporadic emails and your wife was having such a difficult time and you couldn't do anything?
I tell you, my second deployment was the hardest one I did, just because I knew there were issues and I couldn't do anything about it. And so, I wasn't, I'm sure, as vigilant with my job or anything like that as I should have been.
Let's talk about your job on the USS Wyoming. You were more of a guest on that ship in 2006. What was the overall mission of the Wyoming?
The overall mission of the Wyoming was the same as the Maryland. Whenever it goes out, strategic deterrence is the overall mission. But my role there my main role there was to be qualified, to get my Dolphins and qualifications and be done. But at that time, their radio room was already short-staffed. On my first deployment, I was able to qualify all the way to the highest level that I could in radio, and so I wound up taking a more senior position in their radio room, training a lot of their newer guys that they had that was their first deployment. I would train them in radio operations, and so being on that boat was a lot easier as a deployment wise, just because, yes, I did have a job to do as like everybody else does, but I had more leeway just because I was a guest of the boat, and I still had somebody else to answer to as well as their command.
Ending that really hard deployment for your family in 2006-2007, you had a third deployment with the USS S.W. Groves.
Yep, the Stephen W. Groves. That is a frigate that was based originally out of Mississippi. But when Katrina came, it destroyed the base there, and they left and went to Florida. And the reason I went to the frigate is, as much trouble as I had on my second deployment, I volunteered, because submarines is a completely voluntary force. Anybody that is on subs, we volunteered for that. And so just like as I volunteered for it, I can say I'm done and not doing it anymore. And that's what I did. I left subs and I went to the frigate. And the frigate deployment was, it was like night and day compared to the submarine deployment. I had email pretty regularly. We could make phone calls from a sailor phone, which is a satellite type phone. in port, you could make a phone call, internet. That was the thing too. Is we ported. The ballistic missile submarines don't port. We do 90 days straight out to sea, doing the circles in the water, and frigate. Our job was drug operations, and so we chased drug dealers and pirates in the Caribbean. So they are real, and so it is. To me, it was really fun. It was a blast. Deployment was really good.
So can you talk about confiscating those drugs and the process of dealing with those people?
Yep. When we go out on drug operations, we have 2 helicopters. One is a Navy helicopter and one is a Coast Guard helicopter, because in international waters, we do not have authority to arrest or do the operations we do, but the Coast Guard does. And so we go out with the Coast Guard and we fly Coast Guard flags and not Navy flags. And so at that point, we're truly a Coast Guard vessel. And then we have the authority to board the boats if we, get word that, we suspect them as drug dealing or trafficking. And we have a SWAT team on board, and that was one of the reasons I had so much fun. I was able to be on the SWAT team. We would board a boat that we suspected them. Our first thing to do was to neutralize the threat, and so we would board the boat, find the people, arrest them, do whatever we have to do, and then find the drugs. Once we find the drugs or money or whatever they had, we take them, we take the drugs, we take the money, put them, lock them up on the boat, and then, because it's unsafe to leave a vessel just floating out in the water, we had to sink the vessels. And so to sink the vessels, we blew them up a couple times. We ran them over with the boat. We shot them with guns, set them on fire. Any way that was, I think the captain, was fun for us, just to relieve stress, because it's high pressure. It's super nerve-wracking. The adrenaline of when you're chasing the boats, because it could be over 2, 3, 4 days that you're chasing the same boat. Just because you may get word when you're 100 miles away that these boats are out there. And so once we get to the boat, it's the adrenaline once again, because you don't know, do they have weapons? Are they going to fire on us, or what to expect? And so you board the boat, get them, sink the boat. And of course, sinking the boat is an all hands thing. Everyone's out watching how you do it, and so it was a lot of fun.
Did you ever have an operation that didn't go too smoothly?
Not that I was fully aware. I think we had a couple things where we had a guy fall into the water because it was a pretty small boat. Other than that, I think it was the biggest thing that we had.
And also during this time, you were a small arms instructor, is that correct?
Not at that time. That was on my next ship I was.
Okay. So your next ship from 2008 to 2009 was the USS Enterprise. How much time did you have off between Groves and Enterprise?
I had probably, I want to say about 8 months, because I was removed from the Groves for a thyroid condition, and so I was medically put on medical hold in order for that to get fixed. And then when it came up that I was healed or I could go back to shipboard duty, that is when I had to pick new orders to a new boat, and I got the USS Enterprise. And I show up to them in Virginia. They had just gotten back from deployment, and so I wasn't expecting to go on deployment or anything. And they had then just got word when I showed up that they were going to the shipyards to be retrofitted. And so the entire time that I got there in 2008 until I got out of the Navy in 2009, we were in the shipyards and for repairs and for everything else. And that's when I became a small arms instructor.
Can you talk about what you did in those classes?
Yep. Our job was, as instructors, was to train all officers, all security force, and all pilots in weapons and marksmanship. And that is, pilots especially, they had to be able to, if they crash land, to be able to effectively use their pistols and, of the safety of themselves. Security force, it's pretty much training the police force of the boat. And then all officers are required to be, just as like the pilots are in case they're ever captive or anything. And so our job was to ensure that, one, they knew how to use the weapon, and two, that they could safely do it. Because anybody can to wind up point and shoot at something, but can they hit it where they want, and are they going to hurt themselves or someone else in doing it? And so that was our main job.
Was it difficult to teach small arms to people who may have higher rank than you?
It wasn't too difficult because most of the time they were pretty open about, your ability. Sometimes they wouldn't believe my ability until we showed them how well that we can shoot. The difference between like an officer and then like a lower enlisted person is the respect you have to show the officer and the rank. Like the way I handle an issue with a E3, E4, E5 person will be completely different than the way I would handle, a officer mishandling the weapon or not following instructions, just because I have to do it with respect. If they're below me or around the same ranked, I can say, hey, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it this way. I'm going to do something about it. Officer, I have to be more cordial about it.
You mentioned earlier how difficult it was to withhold information from someone whose ex-wife had been killed in an accident. And by this point on the Enterprise, you had had several deployments. So how do you see or view the importance of unit cohesion?
Unit cohesion is a must. Just like on subs especially, one little screw could, jam up the whole works kind of thing. And then just like when it came to the Enterprise, you have numerous divisions, that have different jobs aboard. My division was to maintain small arms and to teach small arms. That was our job. And so, like if we had an off day, and we're at a gun range day or something, and one of my guys have an off day, that could jeopardize, the safety of my guys, and it could jeopardize the safety of, like the shooters. And so usually if we, as a group or the cohesion, we should be able to recognize if one of our guys is having an issue, or do we need to keep them on the boat? Do we need to allow them access to the gun, kind of thing? Because subs, I knew of 5 people that committed suicide on subs, and then plus also like we had a range day, and we were ordered to wear bulletproof vests as small arms instructors to the range, just because like the week before, one of the guys in Virginia committed suicide on the gun range. And so, especially like in something I was doing, if you didn't have that unit cohesion, or if you didn't have the awareness of it, it could lead to jeopardize lives. And so I think it's a must.
Were you on any of the ships where the gentleman committed suicide?
I was. The first time I saw it was when I was in sub school in Connecticut. We were working on, I want to say it's like, I forget the name of it, but it was the first sub I was ever on. We were awaiting our new classes to start, and so we had just general work duties to do, and this sub was getting ready to deploy. And so we were on the sub, bringing food in, loading stuff up, whatever they needed us to do. And we were in line for lunch one day, and we were getting up to the mess decks, and at the mess decks, we heard some commotion, and all of a sudden we heard the gun go off, and one of the guys' wife just left him and shot himself on our mess decks. And so like I was around the corner for it, but I was one of the first there after it happened. And so, so I did not know them, but, it shows you the stress that submariners go under. It showed us the dangerous, situations that could cause underwater, because, if we do have arms underwater, that people do carry. And so you think at that time, especially because I'm new to the subs, I'm just now in school for them. I'm like, it makes you think, am I doing the right thing? Of course, but I felt like I was, because I didn't have that mentality, oh, it can't be that bad kind of thing. And so that was the first one we saw. But then I knew of two other people that did it that I went to school with because a certain situation, like either their wife left them or, money troubles. That seems to be the biggest ones. Just like, out here it's the same thing. But when you couple it with stress, you just like PTSD, it's the same thing.
What sort of counseling did the Navy provide to prevent issues like that from happening?
They have counselors that, grief counselors or, on-base services. There's a lot of training that we have to go through, suicide awareness yearly. But I think with a lot of vets, especially with PTSD now, if they seek help, they're afraid to be labeled as something. That's why I feel like a lot of PTSD is going untreated, is because they don't want to be labeled. Because if you do, on the submarines, if you go to Fleet and Family Services is what it's called, like the counselors or anything, they have the right to notify your command of any kind of suicidal or homicidal tendencies, because anything like that gets you immediately taken off of submarines, just because they can't put you in a sardine can and let you run loose if you're having these kind of thoughts, just like claustrophobia and all that. So a lot of submariners are afraid to go to that because they'll be removed from submarine service.
Have you ever been afraid to seek help with anything that you were dealing with?
Nope. That's how I left submarines. I went to Fleet and Family Services and told them how rough of a time I was having. I didn't have suicidal or homicidal thoughts or anything like that, but I told them that from what had happened with my wife and kids, that I didn't feel like I was going to be able to continue doing what I was doing. And so that's why I left subs.
Being so experienced at this point with your previous deployments, how did you help new recruits who may have been struggling with the same issues that you dealt with?
I think I was, I would always lend my, experiences. I was never afraid to say, this is what happened to me. This is how I got through it, kind of thing. If you need help, I lived on board. When I came to the Enterprise, I lived on board because my wife and kids moved back home to Texas. And then they moved up here while I was stationed in Virginia still. And and so I always made sure that all the people that I worked with knew that I live on board. And so if they need anything, to come talk to me. If they get too drunk and so they don't drive, call the boat, tell them to come wake me up, I'll go pick them up, kind of thing. And so when it comes to that, like, I was always there to say, hey, if you need help, get help. If you don't know where to get help, let me know and I'll find where you have to go to get help. And so, at that point, I wasn't afraid of my experiences or what happened. I would just try to let others learn from what happened in my experiences.
After the Enterprise, you left the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a family decision?
Yes, I was getting out, and my wife and kids had already had such a rough time with my second deployment. We had originally intended to make it a career, because, they tell you 20 years and you can retire. And so, like, I joined at 18. And so that means by 38, here I am retired from the Navy. I get full benefits for life. I get a pension. And you're still young enough to start a full new career and have another one. And so that was our intended goal. But after the second deployment and how rough it was, we decided it was time to get out.
Was it difficult for you to transition out of the Navy?
Not too much, just because I did a lot of research on what to expect. I didn't get a lot of help when I transitioned out. The Navy sends you to like a 2-day class to tell you what's expected, benefits you may get, or kind of thing. But let's see, I got out August 4th of 2009. Classes started at Ivy Tech like August 12th of 2009. And so, like, the couple weeks before I was getting out, or like, when I knew I was getting out in August, back in like February, I applied for Ball State, but I didn't have enough or high enough grades in high school or anything to get into Ball State, and so I got immediately, went to Ivy Tech out of, I started immediately into Ivy Tech and worked my way up from there into here, and so I had not a whole lot. Ivy Tech, they don't help the veterans as well as like we do here, so I didn't have a lot, of help. I did all my research online. I didn't know anybody else that was getting out or what to expect, and so it was that aspect. It was difficult just because there was no help that I got, but being home was the easiest to me, transition, just because I was finally home and free of it.
And currently at Ball State, you are studying computer tech, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did your experience in the Navy with being a Trident operator help you?
Yes, it actually got me a lot of classes waived, just from my experience and my training that I had, like for my computer classes and my electrical current classes and everything. But I think it's the life I had in the Navy has helped me mature and everything, and to be a better student. I think, because I have a wife and 3 kids, but I also have 2 jobs here on campus, and I think, without my military training, like with my time management, working, skills, and just prioritizing skills that I had gotten over the 5 years I was in, I don't think it would be as easy as it is now.
What was the biggest transition from going to the Navy to student life?
The biggest thing is, I think, the not being told what to do or what is expected of you, because immediately I jumped into school, and so, like, one, it's a whole new atmosphere. And, I'm used to being cooped up on a ship, 9-10 hours a day, and then now I jump into a classroom 2-3 hours a day and I go home. Well, to me, that seems great and all, but it's not what I was used to, and so adjusting to that was pretty different.
During your service, you earned 2 medals,
Mm-hmm.
the first one being the Navy Good Conduct Award, and that one you can have no judicial marks on your record for
Mm-hmm.
that. Can you explain how you felt when you got that?
Yeah, I was pretty elated when I got it, especially because I had, went to the Fleet and Family Services to leave subs and everything, and I was afraid. I was always afraid that would wind up having as a negative mark on me, but it didn't, because I never went to judicial punishment or anything like that. I didn't do anything illegal, and so I knew a couple people that didn't get that after 3 years of service, and so to me, like, it was great that I did get it, and so I was pretty happy, just because it is a good medal to have and everything.
And what sort of things could someone do that would prevent them from getting that award?
If you got any kind of law trouble, arrested, big one in the Navy is DWIs. You'll lose it. If you went to captain's mast for insubordination or anything like that, that's usually what the biggest ones that we saw were.
And your second medal states that you're submarine warfare qualified,
Mm-hmm.
and that means that you were trained to do all of the other jobs aboard the submarine.
That is correct.
How common is that?
It's common in the submarine fleet because it is required. That was the required training I was saying earlier. But when it comes to like surface fleet, the warfare because there's like 10 or more different warfare qualifications you can get. You can get surface fleet warfare qualified, you can get air warfare qualified, but they're not mandatory. And so, like, there's people that have been in 20 years and not have, their pins or their qualifications. Here I am, first year out, I have 2 pins on mine. I have my submarine warfare qualified, but then I also have my strategic deterrence pin for being alert for our mission. And so, just like when I got to the Enterprise, I'd only been in for 3.5-4 years, but I had a whole list of medals or my ribbons, and I had my 2 warfare qualifications.
I want to talk about life post-deployment and post-military. Can you talk about the military support organizations that you're currently involved in?
Yep. Here on campus, I'm one of the officers for the Student Veterans Organizations, and our main goal is to serve our veterans, our military members, family of veterans that are here on campus, in assisting anything that they need, whether it be, not tuition, but like financial aid assistance if we need to, information on how to get a job, information on the best ways to do it. We offer programs on campus to just to break up monotony on campus. We have tonight we have the bowling party that's not only to First Cantigny, it's also to our veterans organization and their family, and so we try to assist veterans in whatever they may need, whether it be financial troubles, or it could be just regular school information. One of our big ones is PTSD. We try to assist in not diagnosis, but where they can go to get help, or the signs that they should be looking for.
Do you feel that there's any tension between the branches in terms of these veterans organizations?
I think here on campus, the only tension that we have, like our veterans organization, is the ROTC on campus. It's not like they hate us or anything. I think that to them, they're their own organization because they're National Guards members and they're going to be officers. And my organization is anybody that served, any family member of those that served. And so I think they distinguish it different. Like to me, I would have all the ROTC members in our organization if they would, we allow them to if they want to. We just don't have a good connection with them.
There have been a lot of changes in the Navy recently, most notably the issue of letting women aboard submarines.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
I was one of those that it wasn't, didn't happen when I was on submarines. I can tell you that I wouldn't, I don't agree with it, and it's not because I don't agree with women serving. I would gladly let women serve. I think in an enclosed environment like the submarines are, how close you are with them, it can lead to potential problems, whether it be rape or someone saying something happened. It is a small environment. You are right on the person or the right neck, to where cues are mistaken kind of thing. And I think it puts women at risk for something like that. And I can tell you, like, when my wife found out that they were doing it, I was already out of the Navy. And we know, I have quite a few friends that are still submarine, and their wives have big issues with it just because you're underwater 3 months out at a time. It's only 400 feet long and 40 feet tall. Where are you going to go? And so it puts, the wives will always be worrying, is their husband doing something? And I'm not saying that it does happen, but I can tell you from the recent stuff, one of the first women that already has been on submarines has already been taken off for a thing with a senior chief or a master chief, and so it's a pretty big stink already about it.
What would you say is the biggest lesson that you learned while serving in the Navy?
I don't know, it's pretty tough. I think really it's, to me, it's still always be thankful for what you have, just because, there are a lot of people that are still giving their lives, because our wars that we're in. I hadn't had to deploy over there, and so I don't know the real aspects of it, but I can tell you from the run-ins I had on the small boats when I boarded, the threat is there, and you never know, are you going to go home or are you not? And so I think it's just thankful every day.
Hondo, is there anything else that you would like to tell me about your life or military service that I haven't asked you before we close this interview?
No, I think you pretty covered it.
Well, on behalf of myself, the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project, and our fellow citizens, I want to thank you for your service to our nation and for taking part in this interview.